Greetings, friends. This is Chris Batts, your host of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In today's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with a talented female Black attorney that had an exciting career in a Big Four accounting firm, a large law firm, a Fortune 100, and now an influencer and leader within a CEO-supported organization focused on driving real change for racial equity in the United States. We discussed her professional journey, career advice, her role as chief of staff to a Fortune 100 CEO, her sponsors and mentors along the way, and her current role, and so much more. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on iTunes. We interview corporate defense law firm leaders, partners, general counsel, and legal consultants. You're listening to episode 57 of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast.
Broadcasting from Kansas City, this is the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. In each episode, you'll receive actionable ideas and hear personal leadership stories of both men and women serving as leaders and executives in the legal industry. Enjoy a front row seat as Chris Batts speaks with general counsel, legal consultants, and law firm leaders and law partners at the top corporate defense law firms from around the United States.
Welcome to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Batts with the Lion Group. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Pia Flanagan, COO for CEO Action for Racial Equity. Prior to her new role at CEO Action, Pia was the chief of staff to Roger Crandall, chairman, president, and CEO of MassMutual, a Fortune 100 insurance company. After law school, Pia joined Deloitte, but then landed roles at a couple law firms, ultimately becoming partner at Baker McKenzie before going in-house at MassMutual. Pia is a member of the Executive Leadership Council and serves as a member of the Board of Trustees of Springfield College. Pia holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas at Austin, a JD degree from Emory University School of Law, and a Master's of Law LLM in Taxation from New York University School of Law. Welcome, Pia, to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me this afternoon.
Pia, let's just jump in. So as I have the fortunate chance to host wonderful people like yourself, I'd love to kind of dive in and ask, why law? Why legal? Can you start at the genesis for us where that journey began?
Sure. It began as a child. I didn't have any lawyers in my family, and the only exposure that I had to lawyers was, quite honestly, television lawyers. So whether it was Perry Mason or others. And so just sort of watching those television shows with my grandparents and parents, and just kind of enjoy sort of the advocacy aspect of it, the negotiation, the back and forth. I could say that I was a child who always wanted to be a leader from a young age, and having established a little club with my sister and my best friend and her sister, and nominating myself to be president because I wanted to lead, nominating myself to be treasurer because I wanted to control the money. And so just always knew that I aspired to be in a leadership position. I also recall a time when my father forced me to take piano lessons because he felt that I was good at it. I had an ear for music. My sister was in piano. I was in ballet and jazz. And I would, play the piano and play by ear. I hated it so much that I actually drafted a 2-sentence contract at the age of 8 or 9 years old, where if I promised to never touch the piano again, he would not force me to take piano lessons with Mrs. Brooks. That was my teacher's name. And so to this day in Texas, my mother still has that handwritten contract signed by me and my father. So that was sort of, I would say, the genesis of my legal career, if you will.
That's so fun. So were you the argumentative type or the terrorist negotiating?
I would say I always like to see the other side of the coin, right? So in my household growing up in Texas, just a quick example using a sports analogy, I was the only non-Cowboys fan, non-Houston Rockets fan. I liked the Oakland Raiders. I liked the Pittsburgh Steelers, where everyone else liked the Dallas Cowboys or the Dallas Mavericks. So I always wanted to I like the competition. I like good arguments. I liked being able to see sort of all sides of the coin and being able to argue all sides of the coin. And so always sort of taking that adversarial, in some cases, position, if you will.
Knowing that you're raised in Texas and you went to UT, what was the thought to go to Emory versus stay at UT to get your law degree?
Quite honestly, I was ready to leave Texas.
Okay.
Born and raised in Texas, spent 4.5 years at UT because I declared a second major at the end of my junior year. So spent an extra semester in college and I was ready to leave. I was ready to see the world. My family is primarily from Louisiana and Texas. And so just really didn't have exposure to other parts of the country, if you will, or even the world for that matter. And so I applied to a number of different law schools and landed on Emory. It wasn't too far from home so that I could satisfy my parents, but it was far enough that I could be on my own and really sort of develop myself into the adult that I am today, if you will.
You have a fun story, an important story for people to learn because you started out in big accounting before going into a law firm. Share about that journey.
I did. And really, it wasn't intentional, if you will. It was
Mhm.
just a matter of where could I get a job, quite
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
I had a couple of different offers from firms in Atlanta. However, I knew that I wanted to be in New York City, and I was not able to land a position at a law firm in New York City. However, I was able to land a position at Deloitte, one of the, at the time, I think, big six accounting firms. And so I took a leap of faith and I started my career at Deloitte, not necessarily knowing how I would then find my way or work my way into a position or a role within private practice. But things worked out, obviously.
They definitely did. So were you recruited by a third party into your next firm, which was Morris Cohen?
I was recruited by a headhunter.
Okay.
So I was open and
Yeah.
receptive to moving. I spent 2 years at Deloitte. A recruiter reached out to me to see if I would be interested in pursuing other opportunities. Given my tax background, they presented an opportunity at Morris & Cohen that was a mixture of tax as well as employee benefits. I did not have any exposure to employee benefits at that point in time, but I thought it was, again, an opportunity to transition from Deloitte into a law firm, an opportunity to learn a different area of the law. And so I jumped at the opportunity.
That's awesome. And it really seems like an extraordinary journey for you because you then transitioned to another firm that is now no longer around. Is that correct? The Coder Brothers?
That is correct. I transitioned from Morris & Cohen to Couder Brothers, which was a French firm, international law firm, had offices in Paris as well as New York City. Couder is now defunct. I spent 5 years at Couder before the firm ultimately shuttered its doors, and Baker McKenzie acquired the New York office of Couder Brothers as well as attorneys from some of the other offices. But it was a great firm. I enjoyed working there. I got a chance to meet a lot of different people, a lot of people of different nationalities, being that it was an international firm, a very collegial working environment. I made friends there that I still have to this day. And so definitely miss the good times of Couder Brothers.
So I just want to take a moment and pause and ask for advice from you, Pia, because there's going to be a number of attorneys who are listening and have just heard your journey. What advice would you give them right now? Because we are in the hottest associate market that we have seen in a decade or two. And there are people who are asking, should I move? When should I move? Where should I go? And you've made a couple moves, which is completely normal. You've landed at some wonderful firms, including big accounting, and now you ended your private practice career at Baker McKenzie. But what advice would you give people who are considering new roles right now?
I think you have to trust your instinct. When I made the transition from Deloitte to Morris & Cohen, I felt that it was time to move. I felt that, it was a great experience, but I felt that there was more that I wanted to do and that the only place that I could accomplish that was at a law firm. And so just really trusting my instinct and not knowing, where that would land me, but I was open and flexible and willing to relocate, whether that be out of New York City or within New York City, just to a different location. I would also say, don't overthink it.
Mm.
In the first few years of your career, we're learning, right? And you don't necessarily have to pigeonhole yourself into a specific practice area. I started in tax. I landed a role that was a combination of tax and ERISA. Never even heard of ERISA, quite honestly, at that point in time. But I felt that I was smart. I was capable of learning and grasping new concepts quickly. And so I just did not allow that to discourage me from accepting and considering the opportunity. So I think just being open and flexible. We're in a gig economy right now, so many people are going to have, 5 to 10 jobs probably over the course of their career.
Yeah.
And just realizing that you're never stuck. and you shouldn't feel stuck. And there's always another role to come your way. Again, if you're open and you're flexible and you develop the relationships and mentors to give you advice and guidance along the way.
Hi, listeners. This is Chris Batts, legal recruiter and owner of The Lion Group. My team and I place legal and compliance talent around the United States and are known for our level of communication, speed, and strong track record. If you're an employer hiring your first attorney or first general counsel or adding talent to your corporate legal department or compliance team, we should talk. Also, if you're a corporate defense law partner or group wondering about your options for a lateral move, we should also talk. Every aspect of our process is confidential, fast, and thorough. Contact us by going to our website, findthelions.com, or you can text the word headhunter to the number 44222, and then complete the web form and we'll follow up with you shortly. Now back to the show. Pia, so we're in extraordinary times. The matters of race have been and have always been a really big issue, but have become a place of justice now. What was it like being a Black female going into a white man's world of law, and anything to note within the different firms or employers you've been at so far?
Yeah, it was definitely a different experience. I mean, again, I grew up in Texas. I grew up in a very integrated neighborhood. But when I got to UT Austin, obviously predominantly white institution. And so you're not exposed to as many people of color as perhaps you were used to growing up and going to public schools in Beaumont, Texas. When I got to law school, Emory was actually doing a better job on diversity and inclusion, and to this day continues to make improvements. But relocating to New York City, joining again institutions that are predominantly white, being at least at Deloitte the only Black in my practice group, the Black person, whether male or female, in my practice group. Morrison Cohen being the first and the only African-American associate at that time. It's a very lonely and isolating experience. And that doesn't mean that I didn't have friends and colleagues whom I could confide in or speak with, but there's just something different and special about having someone around who looks like you. Representation matters. Having someone who has similar lived and shared experiences matter. Because when I'm looking for someone to go to for advice or counseling, my issues may be unique and are different, and they were unique and different from the issues that my white female colleagues were experiencing. And so it truly does matter to have people who have that shared experience working alongside you, or at least in leadership roles at your firms, to whom you can look up to and aspire to be. But I think that, for as much progress as law firms have made over the years, we obviously still have a ways to go. We're definitely further behind than corporate America per se, but I remain optimistic. I'm forever optimistic. And so I'm hoping that a lot of the efforts that are taking place around diversity, equity, and inclusion will stick, and that we will actually see progress at all levels of the pipeline.
Was it different for you at Coder, knowing it was a international law firm from France, or even at Baker, which is a massive global law firm?
I would say that, again, I enjoy the diversity of Coder and the diversity of Baker McKenzie. And that didn't necessarily mean, diversity in terms of racial or ethnic diversity, but diversity of perspectives. You had people from different parts of the country, from different parts of the world working together. So from that perspective, it was not different, but from the perspective of, were there people that looked like me? At either of those firms, at least in the New York offices of those firms, very few. At Coder Brothers, there was one, I think, African-American female who is now a professor of law at Utah University, College of Law in Utah. And there was another Black African-American male who left the firm shortly as I joined. But I'll tell you why representation matters. Shortly after I joined Coder Brothers, I was taking a couple of individuals out for lunch. We were recruiting for a summer associate class. And at the end of the lunch, one of the young men, African-American male, said that he had enjoyed meeting everyone that day during his interviews, but the one thing that concerned him was the lack of people who looked like him. People did not want to come to the firm being the first or the only African-American male. And so representation truly does matter from a recruitment perspective, as well as from a retention perspective. It's important that you see yourself at that law firm, regardless of your race or ethnicity. You see that there is a pathway for people who look like you at that law firm. And so I think it's critically important. And like I said, while both of the firms were diverse, and that's diverse very, very broadly speaking, there was definitely a lack of diversity as it pertains specifically to African American or Black representation.
You became partner at Baker McKenzie. How long were you partner, and would you just share insights of that journey of becoming partner at a massive law firm?
I like to say that it was my plan all along, but quite honestly, it wasn't. I didn't know where my career was going to take me. I've never been one to actually, write down, 5 or 10-year goals. I do kind of go by the flow and operate sort of more spontaneously when it comes to my career. Again, I don't know if that's good or bad. It's worked out for me so far, but I would say that, you have to focus on the job at hand. And so I was an executive compensation and employee benefits attorney, and I focused on, doing great at that role, and making sure that I was adding value for my clients in that specific role. And so if you're doing that, you're adding value, not only to your clients, you're a value add to the organization, your law firm as well. Hopefully you will grow into that partnership role. I think along the way, you definitely need to, obviously building clients and book of business and all of that goes along with it. But I definitely think you definitely need to have people that you can speak with along the journey to ensure that you're on the right path, to ensure that this is exactly what you want to do, to understand the pros and the cons of being a partner, to understand the pitfalls, to understand the sacrifice, quite honestly, that you're going to have to make. I remember recruiting at NYU when I was at, whether it was Morrison Cohen or Baker McKenzie or Cudette Brothers, I made a point to try to get placed on the hiring committee at all of my firms because I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to make sure that we were actively recruiting and retaining diverse talent. I recall students at NYU, because we didn't have much luck securing students from NYU for permanent positions. And the head of career services, we were chatting, and she mentioned that a lot of students realize that making law firm partner is not sort of the brass ring that it once was, right? That even once you make partner, it's sort of like you've reached the finish line, or so you thought, but they keep moving the line further and further back, right? There's still a lot more to do. You don't go into autopilot once you make partner. You still have to be concerned about building a book of business, about keeping yourself busy, about keeping associates busy, about participating in firm management and other committees. There's a lot that goes into it. And so for a lot of students, it may not be viewed as a brass ring, but that does not mean that you still cannot have a solid legal career at a law firm in a different capacity.
So it sounds like part of your story is that you were approached by MassMutual to go in-house. And what's interesting, I find in this journey that I'd love for you to share is so many partners get to a level in law firms where they're just paid so much money that they couldn't see themselves going in-house, or there's too much of a greener grass mentality, thinking in-house is simply cake and it's going to be easy. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit of your story around that and the reality.
Sure. So I met Mark Rolick, who is the retired general counsel at MassMutual, about maybe around 2011 at a National Bar Association conference. I heard him speak on a panel, and I was like, wow, here's a middle-aged white guy speaking about diversity and inclusion and how much it matters to him, and giving evidence and examples of things that he's doing within his organization to really advance D&I efforts. And I was like, that's very, very interesting, and it piqued my interest. And so I spoke with Mark after that conference. I actually had him participate in a D&I meeting at MassMutual. I was the chair of the D&I committee at the time, so that we could learn more as an organization. But at the time, I wasn't interested in relocating. And I definitely was not interested in relocating to Springfield, Massachusetts, right? You just don't go from New York City to Springfield, Massachusetts, or most people do not, right? Unless you have family in that area, which I did not. But I will say that Mark and I kept in touch over the years, a couple of years, and I went to another National Bar Association conference where one of Mark's members of his law department, one of his senior leadership team members was there. I met him, Dominic Blue. And Dominic and I happened to go to dinner one night, sat next to one another, learned that they were looking for someone with my background and experience. They were looking for an experienced ERISA attorney. At the time, I was recently married. Again, did not think relocation was the right time for that. And so I kind of said, thank you, but no, thank you. I'll pass your position, description around to my network, see if I can help you guys fulfill the role. But long story short, they were persistent. I went, I interviewed, got the job offer the same night, thought about it, and determined it was just not the right time. Turned the offer down. Went on about my life. Saw Mark Rolick at another D&I conference as over the next few months. Got another phone call from MassMutual asking if I would reconsider. The job was still open if I would reconsider. And so I shared that because what I did the first time was when making my decision, obviously I conferred with my husband. We were literally newly married just a month into our marriage. But I also spoke with friends or mentors just about getting advice and guidance as to making the transition, not only from, law firm to in-house, but also from New York City to Springfield. And to a T, all of them said, don't do it. There's so much opportunity in New York City. Don't do it, right? The second time around, however, I went to a different set of friends, mentors. One who was head of D&I at a firm, another who was a former retired general counsel from one of the company, former client of mine. And they were like, yeah, it's a great opportunity. Mark Rolick had a reputation as being an ally, a champion of diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And they were like, you can do anything for 2 years, right? You can live anywhere for a 2-year period. If you don't like it, you can always go back to private practice. New York City will always be there. I will also share that Mark Rolick did something that I will never forget. When I interviewed with them in February of 2013, before I could even get back to my hotel room, after interviewing with him, he sent me an email asking me to give Sonia Olsom, who was in at Major Hagan in Africa, a phone call. I was like, why is this guy telling me to call a recruiter? I just interviewed with him. I haven't even gotten an offer yet. Am I not going to get an offer? He's telling me to reach out to a recruiter. But he did that because he wanted me to speak with Sonia so that I can get a better insight into the landscape, the legal landscape, specifically for ERISA attorneys, and an understanding that there are very few organizations and corporations who are looking to hire ERISA attorneys, not only at that time, but at any given point in time. And so the opportunities were going to be few and far in between for me. And sure enough, Sonia confirmed exactly what Mark, shared in his email with me. And so that gave me sort of a different data point when I was making my decision the second time around as to whether I should join MassMutual or whether I should, stay in New York City and look for a role that was in a larger city. And so I will never forget that he did that. Mark is always someone who's looking out for the individual's best interest, whether that will benefit him or not. And Sonia was very, very helpful as well. And I consider Sonia, who's now with Heidrick and Struggles, to be a mentor to this day, someone who I can call for advice. I reached out to her actually before, as I was considering the role for CO Action for Racial Equity. And so it's important to have a Sonia and a Mark in your life.
Let's talk about your duration at MassMutual, because I know that you still have a relationship and technically we'll get into it. You're still an employee of, but you had a couple different titles there related to like senior counsel, and then you became corporate secretary, assistant general counsel, and then you took on a role that was rather unique that I don't find very many attorneys doing. And so I'd love to have your anecdotal kind of story of working at Mass.
When I joined MassMutual, I joined as a senior counsel within the law department. My focus was on executive compensation and employee benefits. Prior to even accepting the offer, during the interview process, I let Mark Rolick and the other 8 people with whom I interviewed know that although this is the role that you're hiring me for, I would like to do other things. And so I was very upfront with them about my desire to do something outside of the niche practice area in which I've been focusing for the last, however many years of my career. I think it was about 13 plus years of my career, right? That I was looking to transition into something that was more general or more broad versus a specific area of ERISA and executive compensation. And so when an opportunity presented itself, I was top of mind for Mark. Again, I went in and I performed really well as the ERISA attorney, developed great relationships with my clients, had an opportunity to get to know a lot of different people at the company, just from advising different committees. So I think that's first and foremost key. You have to do the job and you have to do the job well, and that sets you up for other opportunities as they come along and as they present themselves. But that was really key for me, that and the fact that I constantly let Mark know that I was raising my hand, I would like to do something else. And so when an opportunity came to appoint a new corporate secretary, I was top of mind. That opportunity allowed me to develop a closer relationship with our CEO. I got to work very closely with him as well as our members of our board of directors. And so when the CEO was looking to engage a new chief of staff, again, I was top of mind because I had a pre-existing relationship with him. He had the opportunity to witness firsthand how I work, not only my work ethic, but how I added value in the role of corporate secretary. And at the same time, I was also leading the team of tax lawyers and ERISA attorneys. And so he had a chance to see me function and work firsthand, right? To see what I was capable of and how I could add value in that role. And so the chief of staff role was one that, quite honestly, I was not as familiar with. I had a working relationship with the CEO's then chief of staff because of my service to the board and working as corporate secretary at the company, but I really didn't know what the day-to-day involved. And so I remember, speaking with him about it. It is a very ambiguous role for a lot of organizations, and you really have to work with your principal, in this case, my CEO, to sort of figure out what he or she is looking for. What do they need from that person? What are your strengths? As an example, the former chief of staff, she was also head of communications. That was also part of her focus. I obviously was focused on the board of directors, and so I added a lot more value in that capacity, working as chief of staff. But it really is one of those roles where it exposes you to so many different elements and aspects of the company and the organization. You're getting a chance to work with a lot of different people. You're getting a chance to sort of, see the sausage as you're making it, right? And you're helping to make the sausage. So it really is sort of a bird's eye view into the entire organization.
Knowing that you were the right hand to the CEO, in like one or two sentences, what exactly did you do for him?
No day was the same. Every day was different, and you serve as a trusted advisor, and you're triaging matters that allows him to be able to focus on what's most important to the company, making sure that he's spending his time only on those matters that require CEO attention. You're also helping to sort of drive priorities to a successful completion. So I'm not only working with the CEO, I'm also working with the other members of the executive leadership team to make sure that the right folks are engaged and that they have the resources and support to do the job. Part of that is really fostering an environment of collaboration amongst executive leadership team members and their respective teams. You have to build that foundation of trust. They have to trust you in order to want to work with you, in order to confide in you, information that you need to adequately staff your CEO and to do your role. I think, one opportunity that I had prior to the role of chief of staff, actually, I would say two opportunities. When I was in the role of the ERISA attorney, I advised our plan fiduciary committee, and that included our CFO, our CHRO, our chief risk officer. It included a lot of the members of the executive leadership team already. And so I was able to develop a relationship with those individuals prior to being selected or tapped on the shoulder for the role of chief of staff. I think if you want to get into sort of some of the more tactical things on a day-to-day basis, I'm preparing him for his meetings. I'm drafting, talking points or notes, executive session notes for board meetings, talking points for meetings that he's having with CEOs. I traveled with him to different engagements, conferences, events, as well as certain meetings. But you're really just making sure that he or she is able to focus on the most important things and that they have all of the information that they need to do their job well. And you're working with the members of the executive leadership team and other members of the organization to ensure that everyone is working together as a cohesive and effective unit. So you're sort of like the conductor of a symphony. You got all of these pieces, all of these players, if you will, and you're just sort of making sure that everyone is playing in harmony, if you will.
That sounds like an extraordinary role.
It was, and it's definitely a good role to have at an organization, because again, you are focusing on project management. I also had oversight of certain special projects, relationship management. You're a connector, you're a convener. I caveat all that with saying, as a lawyer who's used to having clients, who's used to having cases or projects, as the CEO's chief of staff, you don't have that anymore. You go into a role and you don't have necessarily ownership of anything, or at least you feel as if you don't have ownership of anything. The HR department was no longer my client, right? So how am I going to be evaluated? How are you going to assess my performance? It's sort of a very ambiguous role. So how do I function in this new environment, which was, totally and completely foreign to me at the time. But, we are lawyers and we're smart. We can grasp concepts easily. We can figure it out. But we definitely do have to learn how to function and work in ambiguity. And we may be used to black and white, and some gray matters and gray space as lawyers. But, having to function in ambiguity on a day in and day out basis definitely requires you to exercise and build some new muscles.
Pia, you used a phrase that I want you to elaborate on. You had mentioned adding value, and you said that you added value in different roles. My assumption is you did that in your private practice as well as in-house. Could you explain to my listeners how you added value? Because that made you very valuable to the people you worked with or for.
Yeah, I think you have to understand the needs of the client. Well, first of all, you have to understand the business, and then you have to understand the needs of the client. What are the client's objectives? What is their why? What is their why? Why do they need to do this? Why do they need to do that? Why are these their objectives? And understand what they are trying to accomplish. And I think when you can sort of, connect the why to the what and the how, you're able to add value. You first have to develop an understanding of why this is important to them, understand how it fits into the strategy of the organization, how it fits into the strategy of that specific team or group, but really, how does it fit into the strategy of the overall organization? How does it support the enterprise in achieving the enterprise strategic objectives or goals? But also developing that interpersonal relationship with individuals. I cannot stress how important it is to focus on the human element of the work. We call them soft skills. I saw something today where someone mentioned, no, they're actually strategic skills, because you are going to need people to work with you in order to achieve that shared vision, right? It's about leadership, setting that vision and inspiring your team to work with them, to work with you to achieve that shared vision. And the only way to do that is by or one way to do that, an important aspect of doing that, is to develop real, authentic relationships with individuals, and because they are just as important as the work that needs to get done.
Strategic skills, I love the phrase. Where did you gain, say, the skills to develop relationship in that way, to be genuine, to connect, for people to feel trusted by you, or you feel trustworthy? Like, was there life experience, or is it just kind of come natural to your journey?
I would say life experience as well as trial and error. I would say life experience in the sense that, growing up, my mother taught me how to be kind and compassionate, how to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated, with respect and dignity, how to value individuals. And so just sort of the example that she set in terms of placing people as a priority, and just watching that and seeing how she developed relationships with individuals and how everyone loved her. I would say that was not natural for me. I am an introvert. I still am an introvert. And so the whole relationship building process still doesn't come easy for me. But I also recognize that in order to be successful, it is very necessary. And so it is necessary for me to get out of my comfort zone, to figure out the best way to develop relationships. I would also say that I benefited from an executive coach who, we would do role play, and she would help, guide me through the process and sort of help highlight what is important in terms of what I needed to do differently in order to be successful and to achieve that next milestone. I think it is a learned ability, a learned skill. We can all learn this. But I do think it for those of us for whom it doesn't come naturally, it takes time. And I think also part of it is, for me, it was identifying individuals who exhibited the skill set on a daily basis so that I could at least have someone to point to and see how they handle situations, how they were able to build relationships, how they were able to cultivate those relationships and maintain those relationships. And so, really, just again, identifying someone who was in a role or a position that I aspired to, a level that I aspired to, and just sort of watching them. Again, trial and error, it doesn't come naturally for me even to this day, but I am a work in progress. I realize my shortcomings. I like to think that I'm extremely self-aware and something that I continue to work on.
Pia, how do you define leadership?
I just mentioned that I think it's about setting a vision and inspiring your team to work with you to achieve that shared vision. I think leadership is about influencing people by not only what you say, but as well by what you do, which is why I think tone at the top matters. We hear a lot about, setting the tone at the top because people watch what you say and watch what you do and how you move. But I also think that it's more than just leading people. As I mentioned, you also need to be authentic. I think you need to be humble, transparent, as well as empathetic. Because again, you have to connect with people before you can be in a position to influence their behavior. I also think that great leaders also realize that you are only as good as the team that you're leading. So you have to build a high performing team and not only trust them, but also empower your team and give them the resources and the support to do their job. I learned from Mark Rolick, again, one of my mentors, one of my sponsors, how to do this. He was really good at building high performing, effective teams. And he often has said that leadership is about helping others realize their potential. Mark was really big on, if he is doing his job well, you are going to leave the nest. You're going to fly away and find opportunity elsewhere. He was really about helping you, move on to bigger and better things and helping make you better at your job and prepare you for that next role.
Pia, let's jump into this exciting phase that you're in right now. I'd love for you to explain what is CEO for Action for Racial Equity, what your role is, and I'll ask some more questions around that, but I know it's very dear to your heart right now.
Sure. So CEO Action for Racial Equity is really a spinoff, if you will, of CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, which was established back in 2017 by PricewaterhouseCoopers. And really the focus of CEO Action for D&I is to advance awareness of D&I efforts around within corporations and organizations. So for companies to sort of advance their D&I efforts. The catalyst for CEO Action and Racial Equity was really the events of 2020. Specifically the killings of unarmed Black men and women at the hand of police and others, and specifically there, the George Floyd murder. After that point in time, Tim Ryan, the U.S. chairman of PwC, really felt that it was now time for corporations to stand up and do more for society at large, to really focus on advancing racial equity and racial justice for society at large. We've been focusing on our own internal company efforts for the last 4 years through the D&I organization, but we really needed to focus externally because we know that when companies in corporate America come together and use their collective voice and influence, that things can change and things do change often. And so he convened a group of CEOs back in, I want to say, June of 2020. MassMutual was one such company. I was on that call with about 25 CEOs initially. And at the end of that call, he mentioned that we're going to establish a fellowship. We're going to establish a racial equity fellowship to really focus on these issues. How can we promote and address systemic racism? How can we promote racial equity, rather? How can we address systemic racism? But we're going to do it through the lens of public policy. And so that really is what differentiates us from a lot of other business-led organizations who are focusing on racial equity at this moment in time. We are focused on advancing racial equity and addressing systemic racism through public policy. And so what does that mean? We are at a stage in our fellowship where we recently announced our policy agenda that really fall under 4 pillars of education, healthcare, public safety, and economic empowerment. And really what we're looking to do is to, root out the root causes of racism, systemic racism, for the 47 million plus African Americans in this country and figure out how we can address those and solve for those through public policy so that we can create a better quality of life, if you will, for the 47 million Black people in this country. And we know that by focusing on the African American community, and we wanted to focus, that was intentional because we needed to make sure that we had a narrow focus so that we could try to accomplish something at the end of this 2-year period. It is a 2-year fellowship, but we know that a rising tide lifts all ships. And so by focusing on the Black community specifically, other communities will also benefit from these policies that we're going to be supporting or endorsing.
What an extraordinary opportunity.
It's a very extraordinary opportunity. And, we have about a little over 100 companies and organizations who are participating in the fellowship with around 250 fellows. And so these organizations essentially lent out their talent. They loan their talent to the fellowship for a 1 to 2 year period on a full-time basis in most cases. And so these individuals are fellows, but they remain employed by their home organizations. Their home organizations are still paying their compensation and benefits, but they have allowed them to spend the next 1 to 2 year period focusing solely on racial equity issues. And so it truly is amazing, and hats off to the organizations that have gone above and beyond to really, put their money where their mouth is, so to speak. They're not only, talking the talk, they're walking the talk. And it's been an amazing opportunity to be a leader of this effort. And I am, just thankful and grateful that each and every day I get to wake up in the morning and really focus on how can we make this a better world for people who look like me.
How did you land this role, Pia?
Interestingly enough, at MassMutual, we've been on a diversity, equity, and inclusion journey for well over, 10 years, since before I joined the company in 2013. And so back in 2019, I would say, our Passages Business Resource Group, which is the African American Affinity Group, really started looking internally and saying, how can we better support the business? And started devising a Black strategy, if you will, ways in which MassMutual could better support our employees, how we can better support our African American and Black agents, as well as the Black community. And so again, fast forward to 2020, and you have the COVID pandemic that is disproportionately impacting Black and Brown communities. You have Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. We figured that we needed to sort of widen the scope of that initiative. And so we did form sort of a working group. I was the leader of that working group, where we were focusing on, again, how can we do better? Again, not only internally, but as well externally, through a Black strategic initiative that we started within the company. This was probably around I want to say maybe April timeframe. And then we learned about George Floyd in May. After that, I was having a conversation with my CEO where we were just like, corporate America has to do better. We have to do better. We have to get involved. We have to get engaged. And so we were putting our minds together, thinking about, were there any existing efforts? And I suggested, we are part of CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion. Let me reach out to Tim Ryan to see if they were planning on doing anything. At the time, there were probably about 1,400 companies who had signed on for CEO Action for D&I. So I literally emailed Tim Ryan that afternoon, saying, talking with Roger, wondering if you're going to use this platform to do anything, for society at large. He emailed me back that same night and said, why, yes, we are. We were just talking about this and we're going to be reaching out. And that really is how we got involved. Again, it's just a part of the fabric of who we are as an organization. And honestly, that is the reason, one of the reasons why I joined MassMutual, why I left New York City to work with MassMutual. I was looking for a mission-driven, a purpose-driven organization. I knew that if I were going to be leaving the law firm practice, private practice, and joining an in-house department, that I wanted to work for a company that was driven and motivated by a purpose, a greater good. And MassMutual checks those boxes, as well as the fact that we had a very strong and robust diversity and inclusion program within the law department at that time that has now trickled over to the entire company. And so those were two things that were very important to me. And again, I see that day in and day out in how we operate as a company and an organization.
So do you wake up in the morning and pinch yourself and say, am I really doing this?
It's been 8 months now, so I don't necessarily pinch myself anymore, but I do think about, the tremendous privilege and honor that it is to be doing this work. I've done volunteerism for most of my life. I've mentored students for a very, very long time. I'm part of organizations where we do things for the community currently, but I've never been able to do it on a full-time basis. And to be able to take a 2-year break from my job, from my role, to focus on this work is nothing short of amazing. And so I commend my CEO, Roger Crandall, as well as the MassMutual leadership team for allowing us to do this. And it was an easy decision. After that phone call with Tim Ryan, when he said, we're going to form 1,000-person fellowship, we're going to be reaching out to see who wants to join. Literally, my CEO and I hung up, and he called me up the second later and said, "You in? You want to do this?" And I was like, well, I think I need to get a little bit more information. Like, how is it going to work? 1,000-person fellowship, you don't just create that overnight. So what does that even mean? But he was excited about the opportunity to have MassMutual participate. In addition to myself, we have 5 other full-time fellows who are working as a fellow for the next 2-year period. And so we are all in. We are all in, and we're constantly looking at how we can improve, the quality of life for our employees, for the members of our community, and others.
Stepping in such an extraordinary role in just unprecedented times and being a part of history, really, what are some of your greater maybe challenges unexpected, maybe shedding some light into your world, without divulging confidentiality, but just kind of understanding what this roadmap looks like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest challenge is a divided Congress. In terms of getting this work done. I mean, listen, we're not naive to think that we're going to come in here, snap our fingers, and everything's going to be better. There are organizations who have been doing the work of racial equity for centuries, in some instances, and a lot of organizations have been doing really, really good work, but progress has been slow for a number of reasons. We do hope that we can come in and sort of tip the scales in the favor of faster progression, and not just incremental progress, but more radical change, hopefully. But I think that is the biggest challenge. I think that while a lot of the issues that we are focusing on as a fellowship seem like no-brainers, and I think people can agree that from a principles-based perspective, yes, we believe that every child should have access to high quality, affordable early childhood education. Yes, we believe that every family should have access to affordable and healthy food. Yes, we believe that, everyone should have access to the internet as well as access to a device to help them, study, especially in this pandemic environment, or to work from home, or to just be part of the, gig economy, or whatever it is, right? We can agree upon the underlying principles, but where we differ are the solutions. How do you accomplish ensuring that every child has access to high quality, affordable early childhood education, right? That's where we're going to differ. And so that's where we're hoping that we can come in and really elevate the specific provisions of the legislation that really focus on racial equity. Again, we are a racial equity fellowship, so we are not here to just sort of lend our name or efforts to getting every bill across the finish line. We're really here to make sure that specific provisions of those bills that can have a significant impact on racial equity do not end up on the cutting room floor. We want to elevate those things. So when you think about telehealth as an example, so telehealth access is one of the issues that we are working on, that we've included in our policy agenda. Telehealth impacts all people, regardless of your race or ethnicity or nationality, right? But what it does for Black people, it allows us to have access to more culturally competent providers. It allows us to have access to more Black medical professionals, because we know that, I don't have the exact statistics, but in Black communities across America, both rural and urban, there is a shortage of healthcare facilities. There is a shortage of Black healthcare professionals. And so with telehealth, what the expansion of telehealth access does for Black people is that it gives you greater access to doctors who look like you, physicians who look like you, who are more culturally competent. They don't have to be, at the hospital in your neighborhood or at the clinic in your neighborhood. They can be anywhere. And so we're really, in that instance, are looking at the expansions of telehealth, the waiver of restrictions that took place during the COVID pandemic, and those restrictions have still been waived. But those restrictions will end once that we are no longer in a public health emergency, kind of goes back to normal, right? We want to make sure that we can expand those restrictions or expand the waiver of those restrictions to permanent waivers so that we can address the issues pertaining to shortage of culturally competent and Black doctors and Black communities, because we know that there is a trust factor as it relates to Black individuals and the medical profession. We also know that health outcomes are greater when Black people are treated by Black professionals. And so again, we're really bringing that racial equity lens to ensure that those provisions that may seem, benign on their face, but that are really critically important to ensure that we can address some of the root causes of systemic racism for the Black community. And that's just one example. There are a number of examples like that.
Pia, so I'm a white male, and there's a lot of things that I carry in my heart around this, but I just want to say thank you for your leadership, stepping into this role and being a voice. And it excites me to see that this is taking place and to have someone like you at the helm. So,
well, thank you, Chris. And I'm excited by, the 100 companies and organizations who are participating, the 250 fellows who are from, all walks of life, socioeconomic backgrounds, from different, male, female, different genders, different racial ethnicities, who are all, passionate about, advancing racial equity for society at large. It really is amazing to work with such a talented group of individuals day in, day out.
If there were a CEO or a business owner, decision maker that wants to support this effort, how could they do that?
Go to www.ceoaction.com.
Okay.
And there is information how to engage with us on the website. We are definitely looking for more companies to join the effort. We are looking for more companies to support us with fellows. Because we know that, there's strength in numbers, and there's a lot of work to be done. We have an agenda that consists of 8 policy issues. And we know that the policymaking process is difficult, is complex. And the fact of the matter is, none of us are policy experts. We were all doing something else, in our day jobs within our home organizations, just, in some instances 8 months ago, in some instances a month ago. We're onboarding fellows each and every month, but very few of us are policy experts or government relations experts. But what we do have in common is our desire to create a better environment for all people.
Pia, let's transition. You're married, correct?
I am.
And you have a son?
I do, yes.
What is life like right now? And are you guys planning any travel this summer?
Life right now is a little bit better than it was, I would say, this time last year. So our story is, our son is adopted. We adopted our son in October of 2019.
Oh, wow.
And so he transitioned from living in Texas to living in Connecticut in 2019, October 2019. And so obviously we were, dealing with that transition period for him. New school, new state, new community. And then the pandemic hits in March of 2020. And so his school closed, and they were closed until August of 2020. And so at the time, I felt very stressed because you're working from home. You have a kid who's home all day, and he was 4 years old at the time. Actually, three years old at the time. We adopted him when he was 3. So he was 3 years old at the time. And this house was just too small for the 3 of us, right? It was just too small for the 3 of us. But what the pandemic enabled us to do, it enabled us to have more time together as a family, to bond and develop a really, really strong relationship, and to really spend the time that we needed to spend with our son to make him comfortable in his new environment. And so for as much, heartache and death and unfortunate situations that were caused by the pandemic, at least in our lives personally, as it relates to our new family unit, it was definitely a blessing in disguise. Now he is back in school, back in a pre-K program in person. This is, I think, the 7th week. We were homeschooling him since last August with the help of my mother, who came down from Texas. But he's back in school and just getting ready for kindergarten and trying to make sure that he's emotionally prepared and has the socialization skills that he will need to thrive and survive in a kindergarten program. But it has been, I would say, the pandemic for families and individuals with small kids. It has definitely been challenging trying to manage the work, as well as caring for your kids and making sure that they are okay mentally and emotionally okay.
Pia, do you have any side hobbies or personal passions?
I am a sports fanatic. So again, as I mentioned, I grew up in Texas, so developed a love for sports from a young age, primarily professional sports, so professional football and basketball, although I'm a huge NCAA fan. So I have
Oh,
attended numerous Super Bowls and NCAA Final Fours. I love the U.S. Open tennis tournaments. Anything sports related, I'm there. Although I have never played sports in my life, so that you have that, right? But I also like to travel. So pre-COVID, my husband and I would travel. I also like to collect art by
no
African
fun.
American artists. Bisa Butler is my favorite right now, although I cannot afford her work. She is phenomenal. Bisa, Bisa Butler. Everyone
Cool.
should check her out. She's outstanding artist. And I recently had a piece commissioned for my mother by an artist by the name of Karen Powell,
Oh.
out of Chicago. Also a very, very good artist, but someone that's more affordable for me anyway.
That's awesome. So we always ask our guests to share anything that's on their bookshelf or books they recommend for others. Do you have anything you'd like to share with my audience?
Sure. I think, just given the nature of the work that I'm doing right now, most of the
Okay.
things that I am reading pertain around racism or racial equity or social justice. So I am currently reading a book by an author, Sean Rochester. The book is called The Black Tax. And this book really deals with and addresses what is the cost of being Black in America across many different sectors, right? So from a home ownership or real estate perspective, what's the tax that Black people pay in that specific space? Insurance, the automobile industry, job search, business financing. It really takes a data-driven approach to explain this tax, right? Why we pay more, why our homes are devalued, why our assets are valued less. It goes all the way back to slavery, through emancipation, through Jim Crow, looking at the GI Bill when Black veterans returning from World War II were not able to get loans to go to school or to purchase a home. It also looks at the education system and desegregation. So I'm reading that book, which is very informative and really helps to understand why, when people say just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, why that doesn't apply for Black Americans, because deliberate laws and policies have been written, in the books that have prevented us from doing just that, that have prevented us from prospering. And so really taking an academic data driven approach to looking at that and quantifying that. It also discusses, what we can do about this Black tax, how we can help to create the jobs and businesses that are missing in the Black community, which is especially relevant given that we're celebrating the centennial. I wouldn't even say celebrating, but recognizing the centennial of the Tulsa Race Massacre, where countless Black businesses and hospitals, schools, et cetera, were destroyed back in the Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma. I'm also advising, from a fellowship perspective, advising the team that is working on early childhood education and business diversity issues. So I'm beginning to read more articles pertaining to those two areas. And that includes anything from research from the Education Policy Institute to the Bipartisan Policy Center to the to Brookings Institution. I've also in the process of rereading Mission Driven Leadership by Mark Bertolini. Mark is the former chairman and CEO of Aetna, also a current board member of MassMutual, so I know Mark. Mark describes himself as a radical capitalist who utilized sort of a blend of empathy, communication, as well as engagement to transform Aetna. He really believed that you have to have a heavy investment in both employees and customers to make the workplace and the world a better, happier place. And it really is about companies getting engaged, but not just writing a check, but through your resources, your human capital resources, and really, going into the communities that you are servicing to make those communities better from the inside out.
Thank you, Pia, for sharing that. Last question. Pia, in 5 words, what do you do?
In 5 words, what do? I would say that I am a convener. I am an influencer. I am a conductor. That was 3 words, right? Convener, influencer, conductor.
If you don't count IMA.
I would say a connector. Part of what we do as a fellowship is connecting the dots, understanding how one thing impacts and affects another. So not just connecting people, but connecting the dots in the work that we're doing and how everything is related when we look at issues pertaining to education or economic opportunity or healthcare or public safety. There's correlation across. And so sort of being able to connect the dots. So I think those were 4 words. I'll say leader. I am a leader in this fellowship, and it has been one of the greatest honors of my life and one of the highlights of my career today to be able to lead this team of fellows and organizations as we get into some good trouble, in the words of the late John Lewis.
Pia, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. My pleasure as well.
Thank you, everyone who listened to this episode of the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. If you haven't already, please take a moment and subscribe. Also, we would love your feedback. You can leave feedback in 3 easy ways. You can go to the blog post on our website. You can click Give Feedback link in the show notes on your device. And then thirdly, you can text the phrase LFL podcast to the number 44222. That's LFL PODCAST. And thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Law Firm Leadership Podcast. This podcast is for education purposes only. This content cannot be used for commercial use without written permission from the Lion Group. If you like this podcast, leave a review on iTunes.